program in just one moment. Welcome to City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Courtney Nelson, president of City Club. For 100 years, City Club of Portland is where civic-minded people come together to make Portland and Oregon a better place for everyone to live, work, and explore. We're gathered here at the Sentinel Hotel, along with all of you listening on OPB radio or viewing on Portland Community Media or YouTube. The generous support of City Club's corporate and media partners enables us to put on the state's best civic programs week after week. Today's special Friday Forum sponsor includes Wells Fargo. Our media partner is Oregon Business Magazine, and our current Friday Forum sponsors are Chevron Corporation, Echo Northwest, Morel Inc., Northwest Natural, and Vacasa Vacation Rentals. Please join me in showing our appreciation for all of our sponsors. And now on to today's program, which is the white's role in advancing social justice. Portland has often been referred to as the whitest city in America. A recent article in The Atlantic referenced this while also touching on the institutional racism that has permeated our state throughout its history, as well as the broader society and culture that we live in today. As a nation, a city, a club, there's been a pattern of intentional and unintentional racism. At this time in our history, we are coming to terms with our past as we look towards a more equitable future. We have seen many who proclaim all lives matter, yet cringe when they hear Black Lives Matter. We believe this dynamic deserves to be examined. By acknowledging the dinosaur in the room, yes, I said dinosaur, because like dinosaurs, racism is larger in our society than an elephant. It's prehistoric and should be extinct. So by acknowledging this dinosaur, by acknowledging this dinosaur in the room, we can begin to have these difficult but fruitful and important conversations. We intend for this forum to be the start of many conversations that we as a club can have together. Today, as you can see, we're joined by 5 amazing women who have dedicated their lives to public service, racial justice, equity, and inclusion. Serilda Summers-McGee is the Human Resources Director for the Oregon Department of Education. Prior to holding this role, she was the Talent Planning Manager at Kaiser Permanente Northwest, where she served as a consultant to the region's leadership teams. Dr. Ann Curry-Stevens is a faculty member of Portland State University's School of Social Work. Her teaching centers on community practice, social justice, qualitative research, and building student capacity for undoing racism, poverty, and other forms of oppression. Rika Strong is the Chief of Operations and Equity for United Way of the Columbia Willamette. For more than a decade, Rika has worked with public and private agencies to develop strategies to improve organizational, cultural humility. As a diversity and inclusion practitioner, Rika has led organizational efforts to integrate diversity and inclusion measures into policy. Megan Irwin is the outgoing Early Learning Systems Director for the state of Oregon. Megan holds a BA in journalism and in political science from Arizona State University and is one of Portland Business Journal's 2016 40 Under 40, and in 2015 was selected as one of Emerge Magazine's Rising Leaders in Early Childhood Education. Our moderator is Carol Collymore, the Public Affairs Director at the Oregon Department of Education, and also I'm proud to serve with her on the City Club's Board of Governors. Please join me in welcoming our panel today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carol Collymore, and we're ready for a really good conversation today. So I'd like to start by saying, women are often catalysts for movements, yet we rarely get acknowledged. So the stage we set today is deliberate, with women who are coming into their power and choosing to use it for racial justice. So ladies, let's have a conversation. We all have an awakening when we realize that we are racially different, whether it's leaving our small communities or being called a name by a classmate or pointed out by a teacher. When were you made to feel aware of your own race, and how did it feel? And Serilda, I will start with you.
Thank you. Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you, and thanks for having me today. The first time I knew I was black before I knew I was a girl. And I think most people of color will tell you that. Racial challenges present themselves earlier than gender challenges do for black women, for Latino women. So I knew I was black from the kind of the day I was born, right? My mom told me how to act in front of white people. My mom told me, you know, we didn't have a great deal of money, so we had a social worker, and we knew that when the social worker came, how we were supposed to present ourselves. We knew that we couldn't be too energetic around, you know, any white authority, which are teachers, police officers, social workers, et cetera. Like, she conditioned us in that way, and it was for survival purposes. So I knew that I was black from the time I was able to walk and move, because she told me how I needed to present myself and engage with white dominant culture the moment that I was able to touch them, without her being there to guard me from them and to safeguard me from the impacts that it could have, me being engaged with them. So, yeah.
So Anne, did you have an experience when you realized there were people other than white when you were younger?
My first recollection is being at a friend's house in a very white dominant, fairly affluent neighborhood, and the caregiver for my friends was a woman of color, was a black woman. And when I talked at home about that, and the black woman, the black caregiver, was present as the caregiver, I sensed my mom getting anxious about that. And there was an awareness of this sense of, this isn't okay, this is somehow less acceptable. That's the early piece. I ended up getting politically active starting in middle school, environment, animals, women in high school. It took me a much longer time to build an awareness of racism, of white privilege, and that personally didn't emerge with any degree of solidity until my early 20s.
Rika, would you like to answer this one?
Kind of chuckle. I'm sitting here thinking, child, I knew I was black since the day I was born. But my parents are Bonnie Strong and Jackie Strong, who went to Jefferson High School, grew up in this community, and were very politically active from when they were teens. So in our family, it was very clear that we were African American from the time that we were born. The first memory that I have of experiencing racism and kind of moving through that was probably about 3 years old, and going with my father to Toys R Us and having people follow us around the store. And I remember like going, and I just wanted to get a doll that day, but my dad was walking with me and my brother, and he was like, look at this guy, he's following us and walking around the store. And so then my dad stops and he tells the guy, I know that you're following us in the store, you need to cut it out. We're not here to steal, we're here to buy toys. And I remember feeling so embarrassed at the time, and like, God, like, why can't I just be regular, normal, and not have to feel like somebody is making a judgment about us because of our race? And it was really an uncomfortable tension for me, and I remember how that felt. Fast forward to now, and now I have kids, and my kids find themselves in the same sort of position with me when I'm calling out racism in those sort of scenarios. But and kind of playing it through the same way that my father played it through. But that's probably the first time that I actually remember it personally impacting me, being a kid of color.
And then Megan.
So I want to begin my answer to this question with a confession, which is I've always known that I'm white, but until truly 2 years ago, I never took the time to begin to consider what that means. I grew up in a family with a very liberal mother, a good Democrat, but definitely of the mindset that everybody's the same. Be really careful not to give any impression that you notice or think that somebody might be different from you. And that's kind of how I was socialized as a young child. Really good intentions from my mother, but actually a mindset that I've come to understand is really damaging. 2.5 years ago, when I stepped into the position that I'm now leaving as early learning system director, I started to hear from communities of color about some of the damaging unintended consequences of the policies and programs that the division had started to put forward. And at first I was extremely defensive. How can you say that? We all care about children. And then I took a knee, to take a phrase from Serilda, and started to think about it more, slowed myself down and started to listen, and began to come into a racial awareness that has caused me to contemplate what it means to be a white middle-class woman, to think about the privileges that come from that in a way that I never have before. And I'm very much still on that journey of unpacking it.
So let's unpack this issue of colorblindness, because that is something that our white friends are fond of saying. I heard it just last week from a very dear friend, and I just swallowed hard and kept pushing. But Serilda, talk to me about what, when you say colorblindness, that does to Black people.
So, number one, it's a fallacy to believe that you're colorblind in America. It's just not true, right? That makes you feel better about yourself. It's not like that's the world we live in. So let's just start there. But it also takes away from, it sterilizes all of the beautiful things, the beauty that is in my culture. It takes away from and discounts my hair, the way that my hips move, the power of my bone structure, the hue of my skin, the texture of my hair. I love my afro, right? When you say that you're colorblind, you're saying, well, I want to see it from a white dominant culture perspective, and I presume everyone is going to assimilate into this dominant culture, so therefore I will not entertain the notion that your culture even exists. It's disrespectful, it is dismissive, and it removes accountability from your plate. You say, I'm not going to deal with that other thing, I don't see it, therefore it doesn't exist. So that's how I think about it.
Thank you. And if you're just tuning in on OPB, I am Carol Collymore, and we are joined today by Serilda Summers-McGee, Dr. Ann Curry-Stevens, Rika Strong, and Megan Irwin as we discuss white roles in advancing racial justice. So Rika, tell me about, you formally have equity in the title, and that's the work you do day in and day out. Tell me how your team works around this phrase, colorblindness, which is used by well-intentioned folks.
Well, as Serilda said, and there's a host of studies that tell you if you're socialized in the United States of America, you are not colorblind. This country is built on the ideals of white supremacy and using white supremacy as the baseline for what's normal. So we know that, and as Serilda so eloquently explained. In our organizations, I work for United Way. We don't use the term colorblind. We, again, recognize the holistic beauty of people showing up, who they are, and the value that they bring. If you use the term colorblind or you try to dismiss who people are and where they're coming from, you're not getting their true selves. And again, you're trying to force somebody into your value of white supremacy by ignoring who they are, and also ignoring their history and experiences that they bring to your space. So in our workspace, we expect for people to show up holistically as who they are, and we know that racism is real in this country, and we're pretty candid about that. We also know that in this country, the ideals of white supremacy set public policy, sets the way that we normally engage with our employees and with our folks, and so we are very intentional to make sure that we create public policy that go back and that go back and that go back and correct for all of the racism in public policy that actually exists. And so how that might look is, first of all, you're not going to be popular. Secondly, you need to use data. You need to make data-driven decisions. Ann Carey's work it looks a lot at the racism and the impacts of racism of various communities of color. We know that communities of color, when you look at indicators of success, and every single one of those indicators, kids of color and specifically African American folks, the trajectory of how successful they will be is negative in comparison to white folks. And so as you think about public policy, you actually need to go in and rectify those policies that have been in place. So as you hire individuals, we actually have benchmarks that we have to meet as people come into the organization. And so if you want to come and work in our organization and we're looking at the applicant pool, and if the applicant pool isn't diverse enough, we're not going to continue moving that applicant pool through. If we're spending our dollars or if we're investing in different spaces in the community, we spend our dollars with African American businesses and people of color kinds of businesses. When we put out RFPs and contracts, we're very intentional to make sure that people of color are bidding those contracts. And you have to set policy that supports that sort of rectification.
Thank you. And so you'd mentioned white supremacy, which is something we need to touch on, which is the standards of goodness, of right, of politics in this country is white. Even if I do better than a white person, I'm still judged against a white person. So how do we shift this idea that the barometer of greatness is white? And I ask you, Ann.
Thank you. I'm going to nudge this question a tiny bit to an institutional discussion of it, organizational instead of individual metrics. I have been partnering with a number of organizations, culturally specific primarily, who are doing a huge effort at educational reform and improving outcomes for students of color. And we have been taking the primary gaze about what are the disparities and what might eradicate disparities. How can we be on a path to lessen the success rate, the graduation rates of students of color? How can we make sure that students of color and white students are graduating at the same levels? In that sense, the barometer is white success. And I've come to, and this is really new thinking for me, I've come to realize that I think our transformation agenda has got to be bigger. Our schools were never intended to be a leveler. That's a myth. Our school systems were intended to separate out the cream from the milk, to have some folks go on and to teach and acculturate following orders for the majority of students. And so if we're saying that our goal is to end disparities in graduation rates, we want to hang on to the piece that we want educational success. But the pathway through there, I'm coming to believe, has got to be more radical than that of narrowing, of just sort of doing a better job to make sure there isn't discrimination and marginalization in place. And I'd like to just sort of hold out, many of our systems are not designed to be a social or economic leveler. Our child welfare system, our justice system, our juvenile justice system, I've already spoken about our schools. They were never designed for that. So I think our problem solving has got to be about rethinking what we want from these institutions. I'll leave it at that.
So, Serilda, I see you furiously writing. I think that you want to jump in.
I just have to get in on this question. It is a beautiful question. And so I am not an academic. Academics complicate things. They make things deep. I'm a businesswoman. I make things simple. Simple solutions to complicated problems. I want to show you how, because when you say white supremacy, it makes white people uncomfortable because they're white. And they know that there's a lot of negative connotation associated with that terminology. So let's make it into bias, right? So if whiteness is the barometer, and in their mind, they've placed white and great together, what tends to happen is there becomes assumptions about people who aren't a member of that community, who aren't white. So the assumptions that move forward is that, well, black people, and I'm gonna keep it to black people because it's rare that we talk about black people. We will oftentimes dilute it and talk about people of color generally, really talking about no one specifically, and the issues are quite specific from one sector to the next. So let's be clear on that. So I'm gonna talk about black people in this moment right now. So when there are assumptions about black folk, what happens is bias follows, right? It makes a way for bias to exist. And bias in the workplace becomes the new Jim Crow. Do we all know what Jim Crow is, right? Jim Crow, segregation. Jim Crow is about white people telling people who are not white where they belong, what they can do, what they can say, how they can live, how they can act, because it makes them comfortable or they want to relegate them to a other category. Okay. In the workplace, it manifests itself all the time. Those biases manifest themselves all the time. Those biases tell you what a person can do and can't do. When you have a bias about a black person, it becomes, well, they're not as educated, or they're not going into these disciplines, or whatever assumption. You may not even have a black friend or have had a long-standing relationship with a black person, but you've got a lot of baggage in there about how you perceive and see black folk. Because I'm talking about black people right now, but this could be women, this can be any other group that is historically marginalized. When you get into the workplace and it's time to make a decision about who to hire, when it's time to make a decision about who to promote, when it's time to make a decision about what level to set a salary, your biases come into action, and it happens in very subtle ways, right? It happens with people asking, you know, when folks say, I want to diversify, like a senior leader, and then the middle managers who do the bulk of the hiring, they say things like, well, I'm just looking for the most qualified person. I'm not looking to diversify. What are you saying? You're saying that those two things are mutually exclusive. You can't have a person of color who is highly qualified at the same time. That's a bias that lives in you. Own it. Because the moment that you own that bias exists, and we all have them. I have them. I can tell you a list of them that I have, but I'm self-aware enough to know that I shouldn't allow a bias that I have about you to stop you from having having a great life, right? That's not a you problem, that's a me problem. And so if we can just start to take a moment and just reflect on the biases that live within us, then we will stop relegating people and oppressing people and marginalizing entire groups of people. When a person comes in with an accent for an interview and you say, I don't know if people will be able to understand them. Why? That's a bias you have about that person. That's something that you're thinking, not something that is a fact or truth. Back it up with data. You can't. You can't. Start to synthesize down where your biases are and how they are harmful to other people, because they play in the classroom, they play in the office, they play in the workplace. I work in HR. I see the manifestation of your biases every single day.
Yeah, tell it. So, Megan, you are now leaving a place where you have demanded equity as a white woman in power, and so tell us more about that and how that relates to Serilda's statements.
Sure, but can I respond to the question that you asked?
Absolutely.
Right before that, because
Yes.
it's something that I feel really strongly about. When we use whiteness as the barometer of greatness, that is one of the most insidious ways that we institutionalize racism and white supremacy, or bias, if that's the word you need to feel more comfortable with the term, into public policy. In education, which is the area I know about, so that's what I'm going to speak to. In education, we spend a lot of time looking at student achievement data. And when we have those conversations, we always have the conversation about how children of color are doing relative to their white peers. When you do that, you are leading to the end result, which is what Serilda was just describing, of the assumption that people of color will never be as good as or as qualified as white people. I'm shaking a little because I'm so passionate about this topic. I personally don't believe that we should even be comparing subgroups or different demographics of children to one another. I think we should care about the result or the outcome that we're getting for children. But if we're going to compare demographic groups of children to one another, we ought to be comparing them to the highest achieving group of children, which in this state is not white children. In this state, it's Asian children. And if you dare to ask the question at a table of people who are looking at data, when you say that, you get really confused looks and then a whole bunch of excuses about why it actually doesn't make sense to compare achievement levels with Asian children's achievement as the barometer. I think that when we're doing that, we're actually asking the wrong question anyway. I think the question needs to be, what result are we getting for children? I care if a child can read. I don't care if a child can read relative to his or her white peer. And when we ask that question, we're asking, I think, how do we give children of color who are not reading at the same level relative to their white peers the same experience that their white peers have so that they can do the same as white children? And that is absolutely the wrong question. I think we need to be asking questions that say, how can we give this child an experience that honors his or her culture and considers them within the culture of their family and their community that can help them reach, insert thing that we're trying to target here, that can help them reach the reading on grade level by 3rd grade. So when we start to do those comparisons, and especially when we use white children as the yardstick, we lead ourselves down a path of questions that are not even remotely useful. So that is one system that I see this institutionalized whiteness playing out, to the point that Dr. Stevens was making and to the point that Serilda was making.
Thank you. So there's often a lot of questions, and I work between movements, and so there's often a lot of questions between how has LGBTQ rights and that movement moved so far, and then we talk about a racial justice movement, specifically a Black Lives Matter movement or a Black justice movement. It moves at a different pace. It still is moving forward, but it's moving at a different pace, and LGBTQ folks seem to be accepted at a quicker rate than African American folks. And so I was talking to my dear friend Roe, and she made an excellent point, which was, when people come out of the closet, it could be your sister or your aunt or your neighbor or your coworker, and you realize you already like that person, you already love that person, so they're right there, so yay, come on in. I start to see gay or lesbians differently and accept them more because they're right here. Now, your cousin is never gonna come out as Black. And so there's not that opportunity to feel that familiarity already. So, which leads me to ask, how have you developed, specifically our white panelists, how have you chosen to develop friendships or professional relationships with people outside of your race? And have you ever felt drawn in by people that don't share your racial background? Mm-hmm.
I've had a wonderful set of experiences since arriving in Portland at Portland State University 9 years ago. The Coalition of Communities of Color was looking for a research partner to help them build, and these are words I want you to walk away and remember: visibility, voice, and influence. The types of marginalization that were playing out in the public policy arena, in institutional advocacy work, had been so discouraging that they were launched into a space of having to defend, having to justify, and not passing, you've probably heard us talk about this in recent years, not passing the raised eyebrow test of, how bad do you say it is for your communities? And there was this ultimate need for an evidence base. And so I was able to bring together a team of folk. We managed to raise some funds to do that work. We got institutional support from Portland State and build these series of reports to do this partnership work. The task at a personal level has been primarily a joy. I have been able to stay on a learning edge about being aware of my biases, assumptions, stereotypes, of my metrics around whiteness, of my sense of challenge around what counts as expertise. I've just had this wonderful set of learning opportunities. So there's kind of been this self-interested benefit of building some capacity in this area. And at the same time, I just have continued to trip over these significant areas in which I have still had blinders on, have still not been aware. And I'll just briefly share that the most recent, and there's a huge magnitude behind it, but when I've been teaching, even in really sort of critically aligned content, I've finally, and I've had students complain about this on and off for a couple years, I have finally realized that so much of our profession is built on a system of whiteness. This idea that our social workers, I'm in social work, are getting prepared to work with a more marginalized community. So the focus of our work is how to reach white students and more affluent students. And talk about a disservice to the efforts of Portland State to diversify, the efforts of social work to diversify, when we continue to have this reproduction of not having a responsive and relevant education to help them move into practice. I'm sure that's a dynamic that exists in education, exists across health and human services. And so, I mean, I've tried to stay brave. It took me much too long to own this issue. And I say that, and I feel, I'm close to tears saying that I have done this disservice by omission and by re-entrenching whiteness. I mean, I've been doing this work for 30 years. I've been doing this super deep dive for the last 9 years, and I finally am getting the scope of it in the last 6 months.
If you're just tuning in on OPB, I am Carol Collymore. And we are joined today by Serilda Summers-McGee, Dr. Ann Curry-Stevens, Rika Strong, and Megan Irwin as we discuss white roles in advancing racial justice. Megan, did you want to tackle the relationship question?
I do, and I want to build off of what Ann was saying, which is this experience that as white people we have to go through of self-discovery and being brave with yourself to admit how blind you've been and to really think about and pinpoint moments when your actions or behaviors or beliefs have hurt people of color who you care about. I can give an example, which is a vulnerable thing to do, and it's an example that feel free to judge me about because it is not great. When I, in my previous role before I came to the Early Learning Division, I worked for an organization where my job was to grow that organization into new states. And I had the opportunity to open an office in my home state of Arizona. And the entire staff, aside from myself, were Latino. And I built beautiful friendships with each member of that team. I'm still in touch with them all today, and I love them. The year that I was leading that part of our organization, we were working on a couple of things with the legislature and a ballot measure to pass a sales tax increase to fund education. And we were working within the context of an extremely conservative legislature in Arizona. That also happened to be the year that Senate Bill 1070 passed, which is an extremely racist policy aimed at damaging and hurting Latino people in Arizona. Obviously, my staff were upset. Almost all of our members were Latino families, some of whom were undocumented. My staff wanted to do something about it. They wanted to say something about it, and they wanted to do it publicly with the organization's name attached. And I said no, because I didn't understand the pain that they were going through, even though I cared about them deeply. I was more concerned about how that might compromise the rest of our agenda. In the exploration of my biases and my blinders that I've been going through for the last couple of years, I have come to understand how incredibly damaging that was to people who I care deeply about. I'm ashamed of it, but I tell that story because I want every white person in this room to leave here and think about a time when you did the same thing to people who you care about. I don't know that you have to go apologize to them in tears. In fact, they probably don't want you to because they might be sick of white people's tears. But I just want you to think about it. I want you to think about it and have that experience that I guarantee you can pinpoint, push your thinking further, and then I want you to go do some research online, read some books, and really go down a path of self-discovery so that you cannot perpetuate that same type of hurt again. In my professional role where I am now, I have had the joy of getting to work with a diverse staff, and it's been wonderful. It would have been so easy for me to surround myself with other women exactly like me and exist in an echo chamber where everyone would agree that my idea was the best idea, and I always think I'm the most right person in a room. And that echo chamber is very dangerous, especially when you are doing public policy work. And so it's been wonderful to have all different kinds of ideas that come forward, incredible creativity, and to see what can happen when you have people around you who are not like you to push and pull and ultimately come up with better ideas and better work.
Thank you. So, Rika, you can clap for that if you want. So, Rika, obviously this is a sold-out room and of mostly white people who are here by choice, which means so much. And so let us start offering lessons. White people often say they want help and don't know where to start. Where do we start?
So actually the solution's pretty simple. Stop doing racist stuff. Now, mind you, I did not call you a racist, but I said stop doing racist stuff. It actually is not that difficult. And I'm looking in this room, looks like we're more than half women. If men are doing sexist stuff, what do you want men to do? To stop it. And it's the same sort of question that we ask ourselves around people of color. I want you to think about that. A couple of things that I would like for white people to do is to stop relying on your work that you need to do and relying on people of color, African Americans, to carry your burden of race and have the expectation that they figure it out for you. We are smart. You are smart, intelligent people. You know how to problem solve. You know how to figure out things where issues occur. And I want you to use your problem solving and critical thinking skills to move through racism and stop expecting people of color to carry the brunt of it or the solutions for you in that space. Do your work. The other thing that I think that is important is that white people recognize our history, recognize that people of color have contributed to the history of this country, to the value of this community, recognize the impacts of things like gentrification when you're riding your bike through historically black communities who were nice bike paths weren't built for them. Recognize when you're walking your dog down the street and your dog is sniffing on an elderly black man who doesn't like dogs. Recognize that African Americans have a very negative history with dogs being used against them to attack them, and that's why they don't like your dogs and they don't want your dogs sniffing on them. Recognize your microaggressions. Recognize when you're in the car and implicit bias and your kids are in the back seat and you reach over and lock the door because guess now it's in East Portland, because you're in East Portland. Or when your nieces or grandkids are with you and you pull your purse closer to you because African American kids are walking down the street near you. Recognize how implicit bias impacts your actions against people of color. Get off of cruise control when we're talking about race. Be intentional. The other thing that I think is important is that you build authentic relationships with African American people. You may think that you have an African American friend, but if you haven't been invited over to do the electric slide or a soul train at one of their parties, or if your kids haven't spent the night at their house, and most importantly, if you have not had a conversation with them around race, you don't have a black friend, okay? I want you to think about microaggressions. If you are a woman and you walk into a space that is full of men, and the men look at you and say, can you go get the coffee? How would you respond? And when you go home and you share that experience with your husband, and if he says, oh, hun, you're overreacting, they're not being racist, that's not a real thing, that's not a big deal, you would be crushed. It's the same thing for people of color. Believe us when we tell you racism exists. Believe us when we tell you that something isn't quite right. Don't dismiss it. Get in partnership with us and do things to advocate for us on our behalf. Stop being silent. Thank you. Silence is an action. When I watched to see, I looked at my Facebook friends, I looked at other organizations to see how they responded to these police shootings. There were very few organizations and white friends who spoke out about it. Speak up. It's something that you can't ignore. It's something that it exists. Get on the ground at and hold your local legislators at a different level of expectation, because Hillary Clinton's not making the decision about who gets hired on the police force.
Yes.
It is our mayors. It is our attorney generals. It is our judges. It is our sheriffs. We vote in those elections. Those elections actually have more impact on African American communities than any other election. Hold your legislators accountable. We should be asking our attorney general, we should be asking our mayors, we should be asking our police chiefs, we should be asking our sheriffs, we should be asking our judges when they're running for office, what is your Black agenda? What is your agenda to support and eradicate racism and impact on African American communities? Vote, get out there, get civically engaged. That's what I got for you.
Amen, amen. I am Baptist, okay? Hallelujah is what they get. Yes, Rika. So I don't have anything to add. She took my stuff. That was, I mean, what an exhaustive list, right? Like, that's the list. If anybody could tweet that list out to people, that'd be great. So put that online. Okay, so there's one thing I'd like to add in addition to that, and I'm gonna focus back into the workplace just because I feel like it is so overlooked, and I think that it is a powder keg. Like, I think it's going to, people are up in arms about how, Black professionals are up in arms about how they're being treated in work environments. And when we get together, that's what we talk about, right? Like, we've been talking about police brutality for quite some time. White people are just catching up to it. Thank you, social media. But the workplace is that new area where we're just fed up with how we are marginalized, and when we express how we are treated from micro and macroaggressions, right? We are over-policed in business environments as well. We are held to different standards in those environments, and things weren't going well in the South. Folks were like, really? I don't know. It can't be that bad until the media came. Police brutality didn't exist until people started to have footage. For generations, we've known that we have been over-policed and brutalized by police officers. Folks are just now starting to talk about it because white people are seeing it. So I'm going to plant a little mustard seed here and say that there are things that are happening in every one of your workplaces, if you have people of color there, that is traumatic for people of color. It is real. When they come and they tell you about it, when they finally muster the courage to come and tell you about it, you should listen and not say, no, that can't be the case, okay? I chose to work in human resources for a very particular reason, because I believe it is the place where culture is created, and it is the place where bad habits are dismantled, addressed, and eradicated, or not. We decide to investigate certain things or not investigate certain things. Before I got to the Oregon Department of Education as the HR director, Black people would go up to the HR department and express concerns they had about being targeted as a Black person in that environment, and they would say, no, I don't think that's the case. I don't think that that's what they intended to do. Now when they come, we investigate it, and then it's actually corroborated and validated. That is important work. So I tell you this as a charge. When folks come to you and they're expressing, and they're of color, and they're expressing to you, or a woman in a IT or male-dominated environment, that they're feeling some kind of way, and it's micro, or they can't quite put words to it, but it is palpable, and they feel it, it is stressful, acknowledge it and do something about it. You can activate, especially if you're in a management position. And also, when you're hiring on people of color, and you're hiring on women, you can ask your HR department, what's the average salary? What's the male, like disaggregate this information and figure out what males are being paid, what non-people of color are being paid. Because that is where the bias, that is where the marginalization, that is where the oppression lives. It lives in those salary gaps. It lives in those opportunity gaps. That is where it is. And you actually have an opportunity and a right to ask those questions and then make a decision on, I'm gonna make that offer at a different place. I'm gonna make it commensurate with work experience or at the medium level or things of that nature. You can do that. And too many people don't ask those questions. They just say, well, they said, let's start them at the entry level, right? Why do you want to start that person at the entry level? Why? Why do you want to start that person at the very bottom of the pay scale? Why? Why do those people have to fight for you to get a better salary level or a different title? Maybe we can call them a coordinator instead of a director. They don't need to be a director yet. I don't think they should be a director. Like, address it, own it, and do some investigating, and then make a different decision, please.
Yes,
Carol?
I feel blessed by the Spirit.
Can I add
hold on just real quick. We are going to open the floor to questions. As a reminder, asking questions is a benefit of City Club membership. If you are not a member, please write your question on an index card and hold it up so City Club staff can collect it. And you go while we're waiting for people to come.
Real quickly, the other thing I want to add to what Serilda so eloquently talked about in the workspace, and also if you are educators, one thing that you need to understand, that folks need to understand, is when a community when the African American community experiences these black shootings by police officer, there is real world trauma to us as a community when these things occur. And me and my girlfriend were joking about calling in while black. Like, girl, today I feel like I need to call in black. And what that means, when we go back to 9/11 and we think about the impact that 9/11 had on us as a community, for the African American community, every time a black boy or black woman is killed unlawfully, it has that same sort of impact in our community. There's trauma, there's PTSD, and with every single one, we're re-experiencing every single time that we had a racist act happen towards us. With each shooting, we are re-experiencing and re-traumatized every single racist act that has been impacted in our community. And so as employers, or if you're in the space of education, when your employee calls in and says, I am emotionally drained because of what's going on right now, you encourage them to take the day off and be around people who can help them get to a place of healing if your space is not a place for them to do that.
Thank you. Okay.
If you are in education, or if you're an employer, you create the space in your organizations for them to be able to come through and talk about their trauma. You give them resources like EAP. You bring counselors into the workspace to help them move through the real trauma and PTSD that they're experiencing with each of these events. Again, do not marginalize, recognize that racism has real-world mental and physiological and physical negative impact on African American people. You support them in that space just like you would with anybody else who has experienced some sort of trauma. You have an obligation to do it.
Okay, and we are going to move to member questions, starting with Ed. Thanks, Ed.
Edward Hershey, City Club member. I'm sure everybody in this room looks at a decision like this federal decision on North Carolina this morning that will improve the ability of people to vote and run for office, and applauds it. Yet here in Portland, we have only had 2 black commissioners in the history of the city, presumably because we have citywide election of commissioners rather than district election. My question to you is that a form of institutional political racism? And if so, what should we do about it?
Yes, but go ahead, Megan.
Well, I have a really short answer, which is yes. And one thing you can do about it is if you're white and you're thinking about running for office, maybe don't. Maybe find out the people of color who are running for office and support them by donating to their campaigns and knocking on doors. I'm not saying no white person should ever run for office, but in a state like this one, if you're white and you're thinking of doing it, maybe don't.
Teresa.
My name is Teresa Rayford, and I'm a City Club member, and I'm also a lead organizer for a local protest movement, Don't Shoot Portland. And I just wanted to say, first of all, that misogyny does exist in the Black community as well as in the white communities. And a lot of the misogyny that exists in our country is part of the reason that a lot of Black people in our communities, our voices don't matter. And what I'm saying is not just the Black people that make you feel comfortable or the ones that pacify the interest of your organizations. For instance, Wells Fargo being a sponsor of this event, Black Lives Matter is not supporting Wells Fargo. They're actually boycotting and protesting across the country since 2014, but that is one of your sponsors. Another thing that was stated in your opening remarks was that this club is inclusive, but the inclusivity is only an expectation of the visual diaphragm or the demographics of what appears to be diversity and not the actual people on the outside. Like at the DNC right now, there's thousands of people outside that are saying that their voices are not reflected in the mentions and the speeches on the stage, and people are still ignoring them. Here in this state, you guys are having this discussion, and there are a lot of people in our community, hundreds to thousands, that we've been advocating for, and none of us even know about this opportunity today. As a City Club member, I left a memo a couple of months ago asking for this type of conversation, and I think that it would suit our state well if we spoke to the people on the front line, putting their bodies to the sacrifice that's necessary to push these dialogues further. Because some of us, with the interests of our jobs, our unions, and our ability to pay our bills, don't have the luxury to speak out without a hindrance or any type of retaliation. So my question is, do Black lives matter? Do Black lives matter? Can you say Black lives matter? Black lives matter. Black lives matter. See, and you guys have signs and no one said it. Thank you. Somebody else gets it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Giselle Headman. I'm a student at Portland State University, and thank you, Ann Curry Stevens, first of all. Without your research, I would never have been turned on to social justice movements at all. And you know, there were a few things suggested to read. First and foremost, you need to read the Coalitions of Communities of Color reports that have come out for the past couple of years, because if you don't believe that this is happening, those reports will show you wrong. My question today would be, how do we, as Black women in this society, allow people to ask us questions and allow people to be, ask us questions and to ask us what our perspective is without being, without seeming and being something that I will not ascribe myself to be. So I am a loud person, and I have a voice, and I like to use that voice, and I'm very eloquent, but I'm very done being told that I'm surprisingly eloquent. So how do I communicate with people who want to ask me that question or want to know why I am so the way that I am in comparison to white counterparts? I'm just asking for some tools, for some words that I can potentially use to kind of combat those systematic oppressive situations that we see.
So tools for Black women and potentially tools for white women on how we can communicate together and quit being surprised by how smart we are.
That kind of goes along with being articulate as well, right? They're so articulate for a person of color. Well, what I think is, really, as I said before, I'm kind of tired of carrying the burden. And it should not be your burden to figure out how to adjust your language to communicate racism with white folks. White folks should adjust their listening ability to understand the impact of racism and engage in conversations around racism. With that said, I am a kind of a data geek, and one of the first places that I lead, my language shifts depending on the audience, but you cannot cannot deny, as you said, when you read the coalition's reports, you can't deny that we have an acute issue around racism in this country, in this region, and the impact of that racism. So I usually lead with data. Data's kind of boring. You don't get too emotional around it, but it is what it is. It's the facts. So I might talk about what the true facts are and how it's impacting communities and start at that space. If I'm talking to a group of business leaders, I will discuss the economic impact of racism in this community. We know that 50% of kids in kindergarten right now are kids of color. If those kids of color are performing poorly on every single one of the indicators, that is gonna cost your Social Security if they're not graduating from high school, and I need my Social Security. But they won't be able to get jobs if they don't have college educations. They won't be able to feed into our broader economic base, and they won't be educated enough to support our work system. And so what I do is adapt my conversations based on what someone values. Another great place to lead when you're having a conversation around racism as women is talk about women's issues. How as a woman would you want someone to respond to you when you're talking about sexism?
Serilda.
In the words of a very eloquent woman on YouTube, ain't nobody got time for that, right? Like, I am trying to win the hearts and minds of people to see things differently, to think about workplace dynamics differently, to think about the value of having a diverse workforce to move their business initiatives forward. I'm not here to have a philosophical conversation about how eloquent black people may or may not be. I just don't entertain it. I say, God bless you and be with you, and I keep it moving. So that's what I would do. I hope that's a tool.
And my personal tool is sarcasm. If someone asks me how I became so articulate, I say I also went to school. So, please.
Danny Rosen, City Club member. We're in this discussion now of disbanding the independent police review, which is one of the unique situations here in Portland for citizen involvement in actually voicing some accountability. How do we, first of all, have citizen accountability of our law enforcement agencies? And second, how do we make that equitable and not part of an institutional system?
We're all looking at each other, feeling helpless.
I feel like that's an and question.
Yes.
I am by far the wrong person to be answering this, and I think the models make sense. I don't know what's needed to support, in a culturally responsive way, that group to articulate its voice to be listened to by decision makers. And so I am really reluctant to see the model discarded. We need to figure out ways for voice to be decentered from a dominant voice and for influence to be built.
I want to add to that. Black people, or people of color, have told you what you need to do. We are experts in our experiences. What happens is, and when I think about in the world of recruiting, when I think about people becoming civically engaged, we want to pick people of color and have them join our little group without having any real authentic relationship with them. We invite them to the table. We don't give them shared power. And so when they do voice things, they kind of get a little nice pat on the head and say, well, we got you here for diversity numbers. The community has told you what you need to do around policing. And the other piece of that is we go to people who are safe, people who have letters behind their names, and ask them questions about what we need for police accountability. Why don't we ask our little black boys out on the street who are getting beat up by police what they think we need to do around police accountability? Why don't we invite them to sit at the table with us and give them shared power? It's easy to sit at the table with me because I can be articulate in the way that I talk about my experiences. Listen to what's behind our community's word, even if it's not in a nice little package, and invite people who are impacted by racist laws and policies and procedures to have authentic space at the table and listen to them when they tell you. Don't dismiss it because it might feel uncomfortable for you.
We have to end, but one final point. There are black leaders in Portland police departments, or Portland police that are being demoted for doing their work, and police chiefs being installed and doing things that are not so nice. And so notice the disparity within its own department, and when are we going to call that out, and when are white people going to call that out, and not just us yelling from the rafters?
Unfortunately, we are out of broadcast time for today. If this program has inspired you to join City Club, you can do so at the back of the room. As a new mother, as you can see, I think that these conversations in our community are extra important to help us teach our children. So thank you for being here today, and a huge thank you to this incredible panel today for joining us. Thank you for being here.